Okay, today we are going to be reading the story from your textbook called The Escape. And before we read, we're going to read a little bit of a background about a different person who escaped. There was a magician called Harry Houdini who would escape from ridiculous situations. And this is a little article about it. The day I saw Harry Houdini escape, September 29th, 1915. Today something amazing happened. I was hurrying home when I saw a huge crowd of people staring up at a skyscraper. I looked up and I saw a man in a leather straitjacket hung upside down from the building. It was Harry Houdini. I had heard of the great Houdini, of course. I had heard that he could escape from anything. I had seen photos of him trying to break out of chains underwater. All his adoring fans believed that he could escape from those terrible traps. But not me. I thought Houdini was great. All right, but a great fake. The crowd began to shout, "Hurry, Houdini! Hurry, Houdini!" He struggled to free himself, bending and twisting his body like a fish caught in a net. His ankles were bound together with thick rope. He looked like a madman, hopelessly trying to get out of the jacket, but within 3 minutes he had forced it off his body. I cheered wildly with the rest of the crowd. Tonight, as I write this in my journal, I know that I have changed. I have become one of Houdini's biggest fans. Does this man possess amazing cleverness or some superhuman force? I believe he does. Today I saw it with my own eyes. The Experiment. I'm sorry, I had the name wrong. It's The Experiment by Martin Ram. There was no way out. The walls of the cell were built of thick cement blocks. The huge door was made of steel. The door and ceiling were made of concrete. And there were no windows. The only light came from a light bulb that was covered by a metal shield. There was no way out, or so it seemed to him. He had volunteered to be part of a scientific experiment and had been put in a cell to test the cleverness of the human mind. The cell was empty, and he was not allowed to take anything into it, but he had been told there was one way to escape from the cell, and he had 3 hours to find it. He began with the door. It stood before him, huge and gray. The 3 large hinges on the door were riveted into the wall and could not be removed. The door itself seemed too big for the small cell, and for a minute he wondered if it had been put up and the rest of the cell built around it. So riveted means to be like mounted or screwed into the wall. It usually is a reference to metal. Volunteer means he optionally agreed to do it. Finally, he turned away from the door and looked around. He tried pushing it against the cement blocks to see if any of them were loose. He searched the floor for a trap door. Then he glanced up at the ceiling. The shield around the light bulb. His mind raced. The metal shield could be used as a tool, the tool he needed. He had found the way to escape. He moved under the shield and looked closely at it. One good strong pull would free it, he decided. He reached up, grabbed hold of it and pulled. But the shield stayed attached to the ceiling. He grabbed the shield again, twisting it and pulled as he pulled it. He felt it rip free, and he fell to the floor clutching his treasure. The shield was shaped like a cone, and it had been fastened to the ceiling by 3 long metal prongs. These prongs were sharp, but they were not strong enough to cut through steel or concrete or cement. He felt a hopeless creep over him. He could find no use for the shield as a tool. The shield was not what he needed to get out. Then he had a brilliant idea. True, the metal prong, the shield could not cut through the steel door or through the concrete floor or the cement blocks in the wall, but the prongs might be strong enough to dig out the mortar that held the cement blocks in place. He pulled off one of the prongs and scraped hard at the mortar. The mortar crumbled into powder. His idea worked. If he could remove enough mortar, he could loosen a couple of cement blocks, then push them out and escape. Hey, what do you think mortar means? He selected 2 blocks near the door and set to work. The prongs dug into the mortar and set it flying out in a steady stream. The prong was just what he had needed. Now he was sure he would escape. But his hand made a sudden careless twist and the metal prong broke into 2 useless pieces. At first a wave of anger stunned him. Then he remembered that the shield had 2 more prongs. He pulled off another prong and went back to work. He decided he must be more careful. Nothing must go wrong. There was still plenty of time left. Soon he had chipped out 4 inches of mortar, but the jagged edges of the cement blocks had torn the skin on his knuckles. His hands were bleeding from a dozen burning cuts. His back and shoulders hurt from the strain of working in one position. The mortar dust flew into his eyes and down his throat. The work dragged on, slower and slower. Suddenly, the second prong broke. For a minute, he welcomed the excuse to stop working, but the thought of failure sent him back into action. He pulled off the third and last prong and went to work again. He was a man who did not like to lose and had to win. The work dragged on. He became numb to the pain in his hands, to the ache in his shoulders. His fingers moved blindly, and his attack against the mortar grew weaker and weaker. At last, he broke through. He had dug out enough mortar so that now he could see the light between the cement blocks. With a spurt of new energy, he chipped away at the rest of the mortar. Of course there was a way out. He had found it, hadn't he? He had proved that the clever mind could solve any problem. That's how he had done it, with his own cleverness. At that instant, the third prong snapped in his hand. He stared at the useless pieces. Then in blind rage, he slammed his fist against the wall. Behind him, the door of the cell opened slightly. His time had run out. His part of the experiment was over. He was not allowed to talk about the experiment or about the plan of escape. However, he was sure that he could have escaped. He was convinced that he had almost had. Actually, he had not even come close. The shield had been put around the light bulb only as a shade for the light. The metal prongs were not meant to be used as a tool. The man had been clever, but he had let his cleverness sidetrack him. If he had not been so quick to use the shield as a tool, if he had not spent all his time chipping out the mortar, if he had not stopped searching the cell, he might have found the real way out. He might have discovered that he could have left the cell as easily as he had entered, for the huge door had never been locked. This is actually the second story I've read where somebody thinks they're trapped but the door is unlocked the whole time, which if it's taught me anything is to check the obvious answer first. Okay, now that you've read the story, I want you to go back. I want you to tell me what, you're going to answer some of these questions, but I also want you to tell me what does it mean if you're stunned with anger or stunned with sadness. So you might need to look up what the word stunned means. I also want you to tell me what mortar is. If you don't understand what mortar is, you're not going to understand this story. So you might need to look that up and actually re-listen to the story if you're still a little confused. And then I want you to answer these questions. Question number 1, what was the best way to escape from the cell? Question number 2, how did the man's belief affect his ability to escape from the cell? Discuss with a partner. Instead of discussing with a partner, I want you just to write out your answer. And 3, with a partner, so don't do that part, but list the major plot events in the experiment. After you finish, discuss the connection between the plot and the setting. Okay. And then lastly, then you're going to put a little twist on number 4. It says, what predictions did you make that were logical? Explain. I want you to tell me if you were surprised by the ending of the story. Okay, now that you've listened to the story, I hope you understand the questions. I will also type out the questions, in the text box on Canvas so you can see them. All right, good luck.